Emily Taylor had flown for 15 years. She'd navigated storms that bucked and twisted, battled turbulence that threatened to rip their wings off, and soothed panicking passengers back to calm. But something about Flight 201 felt wrong. Before it ever left the ground, she could feel it. As she stood by the airport window, she watched familiar planes vanish into a sky that refused to move. The terminal was silent but not peaceful. It felt like time had paused. Hadn't moved forward in an hour or maybe two. Time lost all meaning. Inside the crew lounge, Emily sat quiet while Ryan joked and Sarah fidgeted with her pen. They were preparing for their evening departure from Dubai to New York, a routine flight on a 380-800. Captain Lewis stood calm as always, briefing the crew about light turbulence ahead. The lights flickered just once. No one but Emily looked up. The captain dismissed it with a shrug and returned to his pre-departure checklist. Curiosity tugged at Emily. She tapped through the seat map on her tablet and found nothing out of the ordinary. There was one passenger on board who hadn't checked in. Seat 17C kept blinking between occupied and vacant. She refreshed it, but the glitch repeated again and again. The manifest said the seat was empty. The system would not agree. That's odd, she thought. She tried dismissing it, focusing on the safety brief instead. But every time she glanced at the tablet, the seat map pulled her back. What if someone was sitting there? She dismissed the thought quickly. Impossible. Now passengers began boarding through warm cabin lighting. Emily smiled as they passed, but her thoughts never left that one seat. The first few rows filled. Those premium economy seats always sold out. Then came a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 kids. When the father took his seat in row 14, the mother sat next to him, and the older child claimed the window seat in row 15. That left just one. Emily watched as a little boy holding his mother's hand skipped down the aisle. He was laughing until they neared row 17. Suddenly he stopped. His smile vanished and he pulled back. Pointing at the seat, he said, "He's sitting there." His mother looked confused. "Is what?" "I don't see anyone." The boy shook his head frantically. He whispered something she didn't catch and shook his head again. Emily walked over to help. He looked up at her with wide, scared eyes. "Can you see him?" he asked. "Who?" The mother crouched beside her son. "Why are you scared, sweetheart?" The boy hesitated. Then he whispered again, this time softer. "He's watching me." It couldn't be. But when he pointed to the seat again, Emily saw it too. Or rather, she saw nothing. The empty seat offered no explanation for the fear that emanated from the boy. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down beside him, forcing a gentle tone. "It's okay. He's not here. You're safe." As she placed her hand on the seat, though, it felt colder than it should have been. The boy buried himself in his mother's arms, too afraid to sit. Emily rose and stepped back. Maybe the child had a wild imagination. After all, he was just a kid. Ryan appeared beside her with a smirk. "Glad you brought your therapist on board," he teased, nodding toward the boy. The mother hesitated, torn. There were no other seats available, but Emily could see the terror in the boy's eyes. Finally, the mother chose not to move. Amir sat down slowly, keeping a safe distance from the empty seat beside him. Soon enough, all the seats were filled. The last bags were stowed, and the overhead bins clicked shut in sequence. They were ready for takeoff. The A380 accelerated down the runway, gathering speed. Flight 201 sliced into the darkening sky, leaving the twinkling city lights behind. Outside, clouds rolled like slow waves in the dark. Inside, the cabin lights dimmed into soft blue as the flight leveled out. An hour into the flight, the autopilot engaged, and the cabin noise reduced to a comfortable hum. Emily walked the aisle, her footsteps quiet against the carpet. As she approached row 17, the air changed. Her breath caught in her throat. A cold draft brushed her cheek out of nowhere. Emily stopped and looked toward the seat. An icy finger of air brushed across her neck. Startled, she turned away. Must be the AC, she told herself. As she continued on, the oxygen mask dropped suddenly from its holder, startling the sleeping passengers in the row behind. Emily reached up slowly. Her hand visibly shaking, she reset the mask. But the chill stayed in her chest. Nothing to worry about, she told herself. Now, reassured, she returned to the galley where Sarah stood frozen. The coffee pot lay on the floor, shattered loudly. She hadn't touched it, she whispered, eyes wide. Ryan arrived with a smirk that faded when he saw their faces. He bent to pick up the shards, joining the dots. Someone was definitely messing with us, he said. Emily shook her head, distracted. She picked up the tablet again, and the screen pulsed with red static. Then, seat 17C appeared on the screen, flickering violently. It rippled and twisted, turning into a face that was deathly pale and emotionless. Then it disappeared. Startled, Emily dropped the tablet. The face lingered at the edge of her vision. She whirled around, searching the cabin. Dim emergency lighting revealed rows of sleeping passengers. A whisper came through the intercom. It wasn't a voice, but something colder still. Here. Emily spun around but saw only sleeping passengers in the dim light. Then she looked at the seat, and the belt was slowly pulling itself across. She watched, mesmerized, as the seatbelt clicked into place on its own. Her hand hovered over the seat, trembling and unsure. Hesitantly, she reached out, touched it, and pulled back instantly. It felt like ice beneath her skin. She stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. The air vent above her released a mist of cold fog. Turning, she stared at the tablet in her hand. Its screen had gone black. Behind it was another face, pale and watching. She spun around, but no one was there. The lights above row 17 flickered, longer this time, stretching shadows across the cabin. Emily stood beneath them as her own shadow moved off beat, disconnected from her body. She stumbled back, knocking into a flight attendant cart. As she righted it, she looked up. The lights flickered again and shone down on the seat. A blanket lay over it. She remembered covering the seat earlier. Why was it back on the seat? Hadn't they agreed to leave it in the galley? Struggling to breathe, she lurched towards row 17. She could not tear her eyes away. Something was there. In the seat now sat a ghostly figure, barely visible but very real. His form shimmered like heat haze, wavering in and out of existence. His eyes burned with an eerie glow. She wanted to scream but found herself frozen. Slowly the figure rose from the seat. A shadow crept from the seat and stretched down the aisle. It seemed to grow longer as they zoomed in. The figure glided toward the back of the plane. Emily wanted to run, but her legs felt heavy. She watched in a daze as the aisle seemed to stretch endlessly before her. A figure shifted in the seat behind. It was Amir. He stirred in his sleep, mumbling something too quiet to hear. Emily tried to call out to him, but no sound escaped her lips. The entire cabin dimmed to a strange underwater blue. There was no sound now except for one slow breath. The emergency exit sign glowed red, filling the aisle with eerie light. Emily stood alone and turned one last time toward the haunted seat. Seat 17C was empty again, but it felt like it was watching her. Static surged across her vision, and the air thickened. A pale face appeared over the seat and faded just as fast. Then it reappeared. Closer now, the face mouthed the words, "You can't unseat the dead." She crumpled to her knees as the cabin grew colder. A final breath echoed through the empty cabin. Then silence. Flight 201 had picked up a passenger, and he was not leaving. The sun had vanished hours ago as Flight 201 glided silently over the dark Atlantic Ocean. Clouds rolled beneath the aircraft like slow-breathing mountains rising and falling beneath the wings. Inside the cabin, the air was quiet but dense, as if something unseen filled the empty spaces. Emily stood in the galley, hands trembling slightly as she poured water into a cup that never stopped shaking. Behind her, a shadow slipped across the stainless steel wall, disappearing before she turned to look. She spun fast, expecting someone there, but only silence and flickering blue cabin light met her eyes. The overhead lights near row 17 continued their slow pulse, fading in and out like a dying heartbeat. Sarah entered the galley, whispering that she could not sleep. No matter how tired she felt, something was off. Ryan followed, trying to laugh it off, but his voice was dry and hollow. "Ghosts aren't real," he said, but he was less sure now. The coffee machine suddenly beeped loudly on its own. Both Sarah and Ryan jumped back like it had spoken. Emily checked her tablet again, and the screen glitched before returning to the seat map with something new. Seat 17C was now marked as occupied with no boarding update, and her heart skipped a beat. She tapped the entry, and the name Mr. Smith appeared in black text. No photo, no timestamp, no ID. She double-checked the manifest and found nothing there. No one had checked in under that name. Emily looked out the window, hoping for clarity, but the stars had disappeared behind a wall of moving fog. In seat 17, Amir began crying again softly, his small voice saying he saw the man again. Emily knelt beside him, her voice low and calming, asking him what he meant and who he saw. He pointed directly at seat 17C and said, "He is there, still watching, but now he is staring at you." His mother hugged him tighter, but her own expression betrayed her discomfort. Emily stood slowly, unsure if she was more worried about the child or what she already believed herself. She walked back toward the rear of the plane, her eyes never leaving row 17 as she passed. Just then, a burst of cold swept across her arms, and her breath became visible in the air like winter wind. She stopped just beside the seat, watching as the seatbelt slowly lifted into the air without a hand to guide it. The buckle pulled tight, then snapped closed hard like someone had just sat down and buckled in. Emily stepped back, almost falling as the lights above her dimmed again. The cabin now washed in ghostly blue. The floor lights blinked weakly, emergency mode fading in and out like a ship lost at sea. Then the call came. Captain Lewis asked her to report to the cockpit, his voice tight and strained. She entered the cockpit and saw the captain pale, his hand shaking as he pointed at the radar screen. A red shape floated beside them with no call sign, no ID, and no registered flight path or data. They tried to make contact, but no reply came, only static and distant interference. Emily left the cockpit and returned to the aisle, now sensing a pressure in the air that had not been there before. Passengers stirred, some mumbling in their sleep, others clutching blankets tighter around their shoulders. Then the intercom hissed to life, crackling with a whisper that slithered through the cabin, still watching. Emily turned toward the rows, eyes wide, as she scanned the shadows between sleeping passengers. Amir was now standing silently in the aisle, looking dazed, pointing directly past Emily's shoulder. He said, "The man wants to land," now his voice calm and strange, as if it wasn't a tea his own. Emily turned around quickly, but nothing was there. Only the glowing red exit sign, staring back at her. Sarah came up behind her, pale and shaky, saying she saw something by the windows moments ago. Ryan walked behind her, silent for once, and simply said, "The air back there does not feel right." Suddenly all lights cut out. The cabin drowned in pure darkness, save for the thin emergency strips. Someone screamed from row 20, but the sound ended before it could finish, like it had been swallowed. The oxygen masks dropped from above one row after another, but in eerie silence, not chaos. Passengers woke, but no one screamed, no one moved fast. Their eyes were blank, like they were under a spell. Emily shouted, trying to take control, her voice fighting against the unnatural stillness in the cabin. Captain Lewis's voice came over the intercom, hesitant and soft, saying, "Brace for turbulence." But there was no turbulence, only silence, and the return of that slow, pulsing chill. Emily moved back to row 17 slowly and sat down in the empty seat beside the haunted one. She closed her eyes and heard it clearly, not in her ears, but deep inside her thoughts. He is near. He remembers. He never landed. She whispered to herself, then stood and gently placed a blanket over the seat, her hands trembling. Ryan said nothing, watching from the galley. Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes. Amir stared, unblinking. Outside the window, lightning flashed red and violet, painting the clouds like bleeding ghosts. But no thunder followed, only the distant hum of engines trying to keep moving forward. The aircraft dipped slightly, but returned to level with no explanation or signal from the cockpit. Then Captain Lewis's voice returned, claiming radar was clearing and things were normal again. Emily knew he was wrong. Nothing had cleared. Something had passed through them instead. The seatbelt at 17C slowly released the buckle, falling limp like whatever was there had moved on. The lights returned, flickering once, then settling back to soft blue across the entire cabin. Most passengers returned to sleep as if nothing had happened, as if they had dreamed it all. Amir leaned against his mother and slipped back into rest instantly, like he had never spoken. Emily stared at the seat for a long moment, then turned and walked silently toward the back of the plane. Sarah asked her if she was all right, and Emily simply nodded without a word. As she faced forward again, she froze in place, her eyes locking on the window. A pale face was pressed against the outer glass of the cabin, floating in the clouds outside. It had no body, no breath, just empty white eyes and an open mouth screaming silently in the dark. And then it was gone. Emily finally understood whatever boarded that plane back in Dubai was not meant to fly. It was not haunting the passengers, it was guiding the aircraft somewhere else. Flight 201 was no longer alone in the sky, and its path was not its own. The storm outside clawed across the sky like a living thing, rattling the wings of Flight 201 as if trying to rip the plane from the air. Lightning pulsed through the clouds in flashes of violet and white, painting the fuselage in ghostly bursts of light. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted again, not from altitude or turbulence, but something colder and deeper, like memory waking up. Emily stood alone in the galley, staring at a small, worn object in her trembling hands, a weathered EpiPen, scratched and faded by time. She had just pulled it from beneath seat 17C, buried in shadows and dust like it had waited years to be found. The batch number etched into its side read E1703C, and the moment she saw it, her heart dropped. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his voice soft and cracked as he recognized the item. That's from the old flight, the one with the allergic reaction no one ever talked about. Emily didn't answer at first. She opened the worn black crew journal she had found stashed beneath the floor panel beneath 17C. The entries inside were rushed and shaky, written in pen that bled with panic. Passenger collapsed mid-flight, crew attempted response, turbulence disrupted injection. The final notes were even more disturbing. The EpiPen didn't engage. The man died en route, and the company told them to keep quiet. Mr. Smith, she whispered aloud for the first time, his name finally spoken after 3 years of silence, error, and cover-up. Ryan stood silently behind her, jaw clenched, as the weight of that forgotten story settled over them both like a fog. The storm outside thundered again, but it was distant now, as if the worst of it had passed them by, or passed through them. Emily looked down the aisle towards Seat 17C, now faintly illuminated under flickering cabin lights that danced with cold blue undertones. Passengers stirred in their seats, confused and uneasy. One child wept. A woman whispered that something had just brushed her hair. The atmosphere was electric and wrong, a slow-building pressure in the air that made every breath feel heavier than the last. Sarah radioed in from the rear of the plane, her voice thin with fear. There's movement near the aisle, but no one is standing. Emily moved back toward the cabin, the old EpiPen gripped tightly in her hand, like a relic she wasn't ready to release. As she approached row 17, the air grew colder with every step. Her breath started to fog in front of her, curling like smoke. Seat 17C sat empty but heavy, its presence undeniable, its energy pressing outward like a secret that refused to stay buried. Then, without a single hand touching it, the seatbelt lifted, pulled itself across the cushion, and locked into place with a soft, metallic click. Emily didn't flinch. She simply sat down in the seat beside it, heart racing but posture steady, facing the ghost directly. She placed the EpiPen on the tray table in front of the haunted seat, her voice trembling as she spoke to the one no one else had. "You were meant to be saved," she said gently, "and we failed you. We looked away. We let you fade into paper and protocol, and I'm sorry." The cabin fell unnaturally silent. No engine noise, no movement, only the humming weight of truth finally spoken aloud. Above her, the cabin lights flickered once, then twice, casting momentary shadows that twisted like shapes trying to retreat. Then the intercom crackled with static, and the voice that followed wasn't electronic. It was breathy and sad. Still here, still watching. Passengers looked around in fear, some frozen mid-prayer, others clutching each other with wide, trembling eyes. But no one screamed. Emily kept her hand over the EpiPen, whispering, "I found you and I hear you and I promise you won't be forgotten." And then the seatbelt on 17C slowly unbuckled itself, the strap pulling back like a ribbon being undone. Quiet, reverent, final. The cold air in the aisle shifted, no longer biting, no longer heavy, as if something had lifted, something released. Captain Lewis's voice came over the speaker, calm and confident for the first time all flight. "Descent into Munich has begun, all systems clear." The cabin lights steadied, the pressure equalized, and slowly, one by one, passengers returned to themselves, blinking, breathing, wondering what had just passed through them. After landing, emergency crews boarded immediately, prepared for trauma, but found nothing out of place, not even a report to fill out. Passengers disembarked in quiet waves, a few glancing back toward row 17, none of them knowing exactly why they felt like crying. Emily stayed behind after the others had gone, walking one last time down the now empty aisle of Flight 201. She returned to seat 17C and saw the EpiPen still sitting on the tray, untouched. But now, it felt lighter in her hands. She picked it up slowly and whispered, "You can rest now. I'll carry this forward so you don't have to anymore." Ryan waited for her at the cabin door, and when their eyes met, there were no words, just understanding. Outside on the cold Munich tarmac, the crew stood in a quiet group under the blue floodlights, breath fogging as they stared up at the aircraft. Sarah whispered that the air finally felt normal, and Emily nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel relief or grief. Dr. Patel joined them at the terminal, listening to their account of everything: the shadows, the malfunction, the final seatbelt release. He said not all spirits seek vengeance. Some seek remembrance, acknowledgement, and the peace that comes from simply being heard. Emily closed her eyes and breathed that in, the truth of it settling into her chest like a final piece of turbulence, finding still air. Later that night, she stood alone behind the glass of the airport concourse, watching the aircraft sit in darkness, powered down and waiting. And there, for just a moment, the window at seat 17C glowed softly. A dim, cold blue, like a thank you whispered from the other side. It didn't last long, only long enough for her to see it, feel it, and finally let it go. Then the light faded, and the window became just a window again. Flight 201 had landed. The passengers were safe, the system was intact, but the ghost was real, and now finally it was free. Some flights never reach their destination on time, some take years to land, but every haunting is just a story waiting to be told. And every echo fades when someone is willing to listen, and now someone did.